in motion. I was thinking of discussing reactive components in RubyMotion.
Oh, that sounds exciting.
Anybody else have any anything they have been working on they want to share about, or any questions or roadblocks?
Once again, I don't really have much. I do have a question for all of you, I guess, but probably Lori mostly. Did you ever ship an Apple TV app?
Ship? No.
Yeah.
I did use an Apple TV app as a example for my talk at We Are Developers in Vienna. So I did get it working, but not in a state, not anything complete enough to actually put on the App Store.
Yeah. I was thinking about it recently and just wondering if anyone else has done it since I did, which was about almost 2 years ago. Yeah.
Oh, so you shipped one, Dan?
Yeah.
So what's your app called, Dan?
It's called Thrillcall. It goes along with the iOS app that they have.
Okay. No,
And it may shut down at some point soon, but I don't know when.
The company or the app?
Yes.
Both.
What does the app do, Dan?
So the iOS app has a little bit more functionality. You can sign up on there and then connects Facebook, Spotify, iTunes, and then it gathers the musicians that you have on those services and then matches you to those musicians on the back end, and then sends an email out if any of them come to your town.
Oh, okay.
So the Apple TV app is a subset of that. Mostly, if you already have an account, you can connect it. You can also sign up through Facebook. And it lets you browse concert listings and look at your recommended concerts. Also, you can play video and some iTunes clips, which doesn't overlap with iOS that much. So, kind of a unique feature.
Cool.
Well, at one point I was dabbling and hacking on some potential framework for building Apple TV apps under the Potion naming scheme.
BlackPotion?
Yeah, BlackPotion.
Yeah, I thought that didn't really get past the README stage.
Well, the original one didn't, and then I spent a little bit of time actually building out the app delegate and setting up the TVML, whatever you call it. It's been a long time since I've touched that, so
yeah,
I don't remember. I stole most of the ideas from you, so since you were the resident Apple TV expert.
Yeah, like I said, I was just curious. Not a lot of chatter going on in the tvOS channel.
Yeah.
Wondered if anyone.
I feel like there's so much potential there, but people just kind of hold back. And I don't know why, because while the Apple TV may not be Apple's most profitable device, it's certainly profitable and for them, and they sell a lot of content for it. So I don't see like it's going away. So it should be a platform that people are thinking about writing stuff for.
Yeah. I mean, just personally, I use it every day.
Yeah, I've got one. I
use
use
mine
it
continually, like all the time. And it's only very seldom that I switch over my TV in my office to my cable box from my Apple TV most of the time. But I actually think I'm weird in that, because I use my TV to do all my podcasts and stuff like that. So I do them all through the TV.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that that's how most people do them, right? They want to play them on their iPhone or something like that. And so, but you know, I had really thought that at one point the Apple TV was really steps ahead for things like offices and stuff like that, where you could put an Apple TV in and, you know, you can use them. But there never seemed to be much outbreak of that in terms of applications. You know, one thing that I have toyed with a number of times is writing an app for something called Blue Button in the US, which is a capability to review your healthcare insurance. The explanation of benefit is the formal thing that comes from your healthcare, and there's a standard called Blue Button for publishing them. And I thought that, you know, for older people, having access to that on a TV would be, you know, make more sense than actually trying to get them to do it on their phone.
Yeah.
Right? The downside of that is I think that there's absolutely zero monetization available there, short of, you know, convincing the Blues that, you know, hey, you should give me some money to do this.
Yeah, I think that's probably the case up and down the line.
Yeah.
For Apple TV, unfortunately.
There's certainly, you know, like you got your Netflix and stuff like that. They're making money hand over fist with it. Because I know that's where I do my Netflix watching.
Same with me.
But yeah, monetization kind of escapes me.
But Netflix
there's also, once you get all your couple apps installed, you're good to go, and you're not going and checking the app store as often as you would.
No. The Apple TV, I mean, most of the apps are traditional TV, but running on the box sort of idea.
Yeah, there's some games, and my husband and I got each other the little Bluetooth gaming controllers so that we could play the games that let you have two people playing, and we have a few of those. We mostly play it when my nephew comes over.
There's a project called Provenance that works for Apple TV. It's NES and like Sega Genesis simulator or emulator, and you have to compile it yourself. Like you have to use Xcode to install it. I've used that a couple times, and that actually works with the controllers.
That's cool. I'll have to look at that.
Yeah, the only issue is that something triggers it to stop working. I don't know what it is, and it's always a pain to like bring out Xcode and reinstall it. But it's pretty nice while it's working. Anyway.
I was going to share that there is a new Meetup website and mailing list at meetup.rubymotion.com. This meetup started as the Portland RubyMotion Meetup. We called Motion PDX, but our Meetup website, Meetup is a paid service. You have to have a subscription in order to have your website up there. And the person who originally paid for the subscription decided not to renew it, and it's expensive to renew it, and so decided to abandon that Meetup website because we weren't really using it for anything important, and so migrated stuff over to this meetup.rubymotion.com and set up a new MailChimp mailing list. So if you want to get on the mailing list, you can. We've also got the past Meetup videos posted on there. So if you want to go check them out, they're on there.
It's nice. Thanks for doing that.
Thanks, Andrew. If we got an email notice today, Andrew, I'm taking it that we are on that mailing list then.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
If you get the email. I noticed your email was on there.
Okay.
You've got 7 people on the mailing list now, so. Woohoo!
I wonder, a question that you should maybe toss back at Amir, if he might allow you to send something to the, his mailing list for RubyMotion.
Yeah, we talked about that a little bit, and he's open to it. He's definitely. I talked about.
It could be as simple as sending a note out that says, "Come and join this mailing list if you're interested in this." Just doing that maybe twice a year or something like that for the people that, for the. And if he's open to it, then just combining the 2 mailing lists, and because that might help promote getting more people on the meetups when we have them.
Yeah. Well, one thing that I want to figure out at some point is probably a better system for getting this live broadcast and recording going, because the way that YouTube Live and Google Hangouts works is that you schedule your event, but then you don't get a URL until you actually, say you want to start the live broadcast or start the YouTube Live Google Hangout session, which makes it kind of awkward because then we gotta post it in the Slack channel so that you can get to it. But it'd be nice if there was a way we could, have the link in the email that goes out ahead of time.
Yeah, it's super awkward and weird because I know I've had fixed address hangouts that I used with a team that had regular meetings, and we just had a fixed URL that we always went to. So it's kind of odd.
Well, we might be able to just use Google Hangouts directly instead of going through YouTube Live. I think the benefit of the YouTube Live was that
it's that it records the whole thing automatically.
Yeah. I don't know if there's a way to record it, Google Hangout. There might be. I don't know. I haven't looked a whole lot into it. So let's into figuring out get a Google Hangout URL. Send an email to the RubyMotion mailing list. Anybody else have any updates they want to share?
Sorry, I was just going to talk about that for a second.
Sure.
recording aside, I was wondering maybe if Slack would be an alternative to Hangouts, just using Slack directly.
Yeah, that's a good point because Slack has that built in now. Although I think that you need a paid plan in order to use it. And right now we're mooching off the free plan.
Okay.
So, but that's maybe something that Amir would consider sponsoring.
Yeah, we should look into that maybe.
Cool. Anybody have any updates they want to share? No, Laura, you want to talk about MotioninMotion?
Sure.
Maybe now's a good time.
Okay, so I've had Derek. I keep wishing he'll come to these, and then he always seems to have something else going on. Anyway, I've had Derek working like a dog. It's good to have minions. Anyway, he has been working on his project, which will hopefully be able to show off next month. Yay. But as a side thing, I've had him going through all of the example code that goes along with the MotioninMotion videos and cleaning up and updating all of it so that it's not out of date. I think he's about halfway through the good videos. So those are the ones that are still working, still arguably working, but still they were using a lot of deprecated code and stuff. So he's gone through and fixed up those examples. So now that I have those, I think there's about 15 or so of them that he's got done already, and there should be another set coming this week. So next week when I get back, I'm going camping tomorrow. But when I get back from camping, I'm going to start loading up the MotioninMotion stuff inside the Windex school. And that means the stuff that's on the MotioninMotion.tv website right now is coming down. So when it starts appearing in the school, the rest of it is gonna come down off of the original website because I want to bring it all together under one umbrella. This gives me an opportunity to revamp some of it because Jack kind of jumped around, and there's sometimes he develops an example over 4, 5, 6 videos, and they aren't all in any contiguous order or easy to find. So I will be taking those and grouping them together into a logical unit in the school, just so people can find everything that they want out of those examples. Anyway, so that's what's going on with the MotioninMotion thing. The other thing is that the whole of MotioninMotion is going to be a core of stuff that I make available in my feature course that I'll be launching in its first infant form towards the end of the month, probably was around the last week, or maybe the second last week of August. And that course is called Six-Pack Apps. From idea, 6 weeks from idea to app store, basically.
Very nice.
Yeah, the idea of it is that people get too wrapped up in their own ideas and their own grand plans and never actually get their apps in the App Store. So I want to help people come up with this notion that I learned from Amy Hoy, the creative atom. What's the smallest thing that you can build that has value to people, to your customers, to whoever you want to be using your app? And then build that thing and get it freaking out there. So I'll be going and starting that. And basically, I'm using this wonderful technique I've learned as I've been going through all this business course stuff that I've been doing. And this first version of the course is going to be very inexpensive, and I'm going to be building it as I go. So I'm only gonna let a very small number of people sign up for it, and then I'll take them through it in 6 weeks. And at the end of 6 weeks, I'll have a whole bunch of material and feedback from those people to improve, and then it'll go up again at, double the price. So anyway, of course, the 6 weeks part is there's only like 1 week to actually build it. Because really, if you're going to build a creative atom and it takes you more than a week, you're probably doing it wrong. So the reason I want the MotioninMotion stuff is I want that as a library for people in the course if there's something that they want to build and they don't know how to build, they'll be able to go in there and pick and choose the stuff that they need to get their app built.
Cool.
That's about all I had to say. And yeah, I already have a Twitter handle and several web URLs for it. It's surprisingly difficult to get something called Six-Pack App because it's actually used by apps for helping bodybuilders.
Mm-hmm. That's fine. Well, best of luck with that.
Thank you.
It all comes together. I took Amy Hoy, is that her name?
Yeah.
She had a ship in 6 course,
yes,
which sounds similar to that I went through. I think those style of courses can be really helpful. Definitely got me motivated to make progress, even though I didn't actually ship anything in 6 weeks.
I
learned some strategies to help organize myself in order to achieve that.
Yeah. The carrot at the end is going to be like, if anybody gets to the end and they actually have a shippable app, they're going to get a indie license to do it with.
Mm.
Okay. Cool. Gateway drug and all that. Once you have an app in the App Store, you're going to want to keep that up. So
cool. Anybody else have any Q&A or updates or discussion points that you want to bring up or add?
Nope.
then I guess we'll move on to the next discussion about reactive components in RubyMotion. So I've been doing some React Native lately. I know this is probably scandalizing to many of you. No, I'm joking. But one of the biggest selling points of React Native is this these reactive components, where if the properties change or the state changes, it automatically re-renders the tree of elements. And this is how a lot of JavaScript frameworks work these days. You know, Ember JavaScript framework works like this. You know, React. I'm sure Angular does something similar. But in iOS, the traditional way of building UIs has been, you know, you construct your UI views, and you know, you just kind of manually lay those out in code or using interface builder. But they don't, you know, that sort of approach can lead to kind of a mess of code all over the place. You know, you end up with view controllers that are really huge with all sorts of different things in it, handling all different cases of state. And so the benefit of using an approach where you've got these components that have like read-only properties, where you just pass stuff down and it just simply renders whatever the properties are or whatever the state is. And if one of those things changes, you start back up at the top and you render your way down. And for performance reasons, you're only updating the things that have changed. But essentially, you're sort of guaranteed of just being able to render this once. And so you have kind of a simple flow of you know, rendering flow here. And in RubyMotion, we don't really have that yet, but there's really no reason why we can't have that. It's not like this is specific to JavaScript or anything like that. This is you know, something that we can totally have. So I've sort of been, I mean, I've been sort of brainstorming this for a while. I think I brought it up before, of like how we could achieve this sort of approach in RubyMotion, because one of the nice things about React Native is that once you've got the app up and running in the development environment, you can make some changes to your file and save it, and then it'll automatically re-render, you know, the app in the simulator as it's running. So there's no need to like totally rebuild and recompile your source code in order to see, you know, just to like tweak some styles or, you know, do something like that. But there's no reason why we can't have that too. So, hey, what do you know? Don't waste time recompiling. An example of updating the template or some properties and having it update automatically in the simulator. So the way that this works is that there's a, I don't want to say server side, but there's a process that's running separate from the simulator. It's watching the file changes. And when you save a file, the watcher picks that up. It compiles down the template into something that can be sent to the client being running on the simulator that's listening for updates. It receives an update and then it calls a re-render with this new template. And a lot of the magic of doing this is in how the template parser works, because it parses this template into something that can be rendered. So I was starting to think of how we could implement something like this in RubyMotion, and sort of been referring to this as the electric components framework, but I'm open to other naming ideas. But I've also been doing, I mean, I've worked on Ember apps, and components seem like the way to go. There's this philosophy called data down, actions up, where essentially to build a good, simple component, you're just taking the data that gets passed down to you in order to render it. You're not modifying that data. You are essentially just re-rendering every time something changes, instead of like tweaking your template after it's been rendered. But the thing I like about Ember is that the templates are in a separate file from the component, the component class, whereas in React, it's within the same JavaScript component. Now, I think it's possible for you to split out the template into another file, but I don't think many people do that. So you end up with just one file for the component that does everything and has all the logic in there, and the template and the styles, and it's all just in this one thing. And it feels so wrong to me because I guess I'm an old school web developer who likes to separate out the the template from the styles, from the scripts, and anyway, so the starting to come up with like a I don't know, DSL or API for building these components. Like, given an example of a button that keeps track of, or a component that has a button, keeps track of a count, and it re-renders that count when it updates. You could have a template that defines a button component. This could be like uppercase B. This is how React does it. Components start with a capital letter. In Ember, components has to be 2 words, which is kind of annoying. I don't think we have to have that limitation. They do that because they're trying to be compliant with the HTML spec, but we're not really working with HTML. We're working with native view components. And having a component framework like this, we could abstract the details of rendering a platform-specific component. On iOS, it's going to be a UI button. On Android, it's going to be a Android button, which is what Flow has already sort of done. I think the problem with Flow is that it kind of forced you into the whole framework instead of just being a component library you could drop into an app. So I think there's definitely some cross-platform stuff we could borrow from that. But I think the goal of this project would be to make it so that you can use these reactive components in whatever. Like, you could take an existing app and add in these reactive components, and you adopt it on a per view controller basis. So the challenge with building these templates is that you have to, they have to be compiled into something that's executable, because we can't, this isn't just a string. We need to parse this into something that can be what Ember calls rehydrated, because we've got this dynamic element here that updates based on the runtime, but the rest of the template here is rendering native components. So one example of parsing this template could be that at compile time, it converts this, it merges these things together, this like simple Ruby file, this XML file, and this CSS file, into something that looks more like something that looks like this. It's got the same logic stuff in here, but then the template gets compiled into something that's that would be just like you would something that you would write in a normal iOS app. So that's one option. But the problem with doing it this way is that we wouldn't be able to send these updates to the client. So I think the live reload thing is the killer feature that it needs to have in order to be useful.
So there's a Swift library that does something similar to that, which has a declarative UI, I think, using XML.
Yeah. I've looked into something like that.
I can't remember what it's called.
Yeah, I don't remember the name of it. I've looked into a couple of them that are like that. That it's a Swift-only library that has a XML syntax, and you build out your UI using basically attributes. Like all the style information are attributes on your components.
Yeah, it wasn't as separated as what you have between the CSS and that.
Right, and the I can't remember exactly how the dynamic content, variables and things like that were in there, but it used some clever logic where it would like parse the strings at runtime. And it looked okay, but it was Swift only, so I didn't pursue that too much. It was also like iOS only.
Well, the reason why I mentioned it is because you might be able to crib some of the code and convert it back into either RubyMotion or Objective-C such that it would work with what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
That's not always the easiest task, as we both know, but but it is, because it's open source, you may be able to do something like that to get, further along with your stuff.
Yeah. So this is one option of compiling it down this way, but the problem is that any updates to the template or styles need to be compiled down to Ruby code here, which means it has to go through the compiler, and because we don't have we can't just exec, evaluate any arbitrary code. We used to be able to do that in the development environment. Can't do that anymore. but I think that's fine. I don't think that's necessary in order to be able to still have this functionality. Like maybe this is a production build optimization or something. I don't know. But I've noticed that other libraries that do this sort of thing. I was trying to remember what the name of it is. This is building an abstract syntax tree type of thing.
They compile the stuff into some sort of an intermediate format, and then that's what drives the actual UI. So it's very much done at runtime, but it's done from something that they're constantly watching for changes and then updating against, right? So they've got some sort of a UI driver that they've built that consumes this intermediate format.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the other benefit of doing something like this is that it's really simple to be able to compare changes. So you could just compare, like, if this object is the same, then no need to re-render this. If this other object has changed, or if the children have changed, then we just update those. Whereas just kind of compiling it down to a hard-coded format like this would not be able to do that. But this is also something we could easily send across from the watcher, the server, to the client when updates happen. So potential idea of just being able to render just pass in the component as a subview and have it just work. This is, passing in a property. Another example of virtual DOM. That was the word I was trying to think of. So a lot of these JavaScript libraries have this concept of a virtual DOM that's kind of keeps a representation of what the DOM structure is in memory, so that it knows how to quickly update things that have changed instead of having to re-render the entire tree of elements. So we could have a library load server that uses WebSockets to update client. Another example is wanting to enter in some input text, form inputs, being able to get the values out of those and do something different, or different event states and different logic. So one example I had started at one point was using ERB, because it's very Ruby-ish to use ERB for templating. And I thought this was a better idea because it was more directly just insert your Ruby code. But one of the benefits of using a more limited templating templating language that restricts you a little bit to only using a limited set of directives or functions here, is that you can have more control over how the templates are rendered. So instead of just evaluating whatever content, you're able to easily look up that this particular template makes a reference to this particular variable, and if that variable changes, then you know to update this template. Whereas if it's just arbitrary Ruby code, then you'd either have to, I don't know, build an AST for that Ruby code, or you would not get that feature of knowing whether or not to update that template. So I think that there's some value in making making use of a more limited templating framework, templating language. This is handlebars. It's the same that Ember uses. It uses this mustache syntax.
Yeah, it looks the same as like mustache and Velocity. The Java templating uses something similar to that too.
I've been using some of that Velocity lately. It's okay. It's
I was doing something in RubyMine, and it uses Velocity templates underneath.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to go look up about using it once again.
So the thing about the components is that so in this example here, really the functionality for this can be achieved just by setting up an action on tap. It calls it update name action, which gets the value of this input value and sets it name. And this could be different, but essentially you type in your name, you push the greet button, and that's when it updates this block of text. And by calling set name here, you're triggering the whatever renderer to perform whatever smart updates that it needs to in order to render this template. And it's got this simple directive thing I talked about before. And anyway, in order to achieve most of this functionality, I think we need a transformation pipeline. That's what I'm calling it. But essentially, it's something like the Rails asset pipeline, or Broccoli for Ember, or I think Webpack is another example of this build pipeline thing, where you can make transformations to files before they end up getting included in your app, like transpile. Transpile SAS into CSS, that sort of thing. But we would need to do that in order to take these XML files, which aren't really XML, there are the templates, and compile them into something that can be executed, or at least something that represents the template. Same thing with styles. I was thinking it'd be nice to have like the CSS style of defining styles, because it's so familiar to web developers. Obviously, they would be different styles than CSS, although probably make them like CSS. But we have the ability to do this sort of transformation pipeline, but I don't know of any libraries or any system for being able to just plug in as something to say, like, when I build the app, I want to compile the files in this components directory, or with this particular extension, turn it into something else, but don't include that file in the final output. So having something like that would be really useful.
Well, you can set that up inside of Rake.
Yeah. So this would be something that is potentially standalone or
you know, some of the stuff that I did
essentially-
for the icons follows that kind of an approach, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking that that there are other libraries that could benefit from having access to just hook into, this pipeline.
Yeah.
And so the transformer would compile the components into runtime compatible code. We would need a file watcher that listens for changes to the component files. That file watcher would notify the WebSocket server. It pushes the runtime compatible template and style updates.
So the file watcher, I mean, you could probably implement using Guard.
Yeah.
Or
the underlying gem, I think it's called Listen.
Yeah. There's actually a library for FS events, which is what Guard is built on top of on the Macs, file system events.
Yeah.
Which it can slow things down a little bit. One of the reasons some people complain about things like Dropbox and stuff like that is because it's built on top of that too. But for this purposes, you're trading one thing for another, right? So I'm trading, and when you're looking at what do I need to build to get this running, you might just simply say, okay, for the right now, what you have to do is you're going to have to install Guard, and your gems. That's if you include this gem, then Guard is a dependency, and then you're going to have to create, maybe some kind of a Guard file that runs whenever you do it, and just run Guard so that it's running, so that you get this kind of behavior, and then at some point in the future, you can then, reduce that down to its component once you're working on making that, fully integrated. But rather than spend time on, minimum viable product, we'll go back to Amy Hoy, right? Don't build the components that are, don't put chrome and polish everything when this is going to be, behind the dashboard sort of idea, right? So, do it up the quickest way possible so that you can get it running, so that you can prove the concept, and then you can see how that goes. And then once it's going and you've got some momentum, then, change it out for something that's a little bit more streamlined and purpose specific and stuff like that.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, I got no problems with making something quick and dirty that works.
Yeah.
But essentially, that's one standalone component that's necessary in all of this in order to make this work. And the WebSocket server pushes whatever template or style payload to the client. I was thinking maybe just ignore the component Ruby files, since that part would probably need to be compiled by the RubyMotion compiler. But the template and the styles could just be, that JSON object that could easily be consumed and re-rendered on the client side. Because really, I think that's the most important part of the live reload part, is you're really doing it because you want to make quick changes to the way it looks and see it, as you're making the changes. You aren't really as concerned with making, complicated logic updates. The WebSocket client listens for the updates, and when it receives the payload, it updates its template caches and triggers a re-render. The renderer is able to re-render the tree whenever it is told to do so. Layouts. So that's one part of this that isn't that I didn't really mention too much about, but in this example, I've got this thing called a row. Actually, where I got this example was Stimulus.js. So Stimulus is a JavaScript framework by people at Basecamp. I'm not too much of a fan of it, but they are, I think they're pushing it as a kind of a simple, sprinkle in a little bit of JavaScript component type of stuff. Because the way that they do it is through all these data attributes. They've even got this like Ruby syntax DSL in here for performing an action, a click action here. Like click with the arrow to the hello controller, the greet method. Specifying these targets. So it's, my example over here is a little bit simpler. And I think it doesn't need to be more complicated than this. But you can see in the UI here that it's a single line. I was thinking, well, how would I achieve this concept here? Because how do we define in the template that we want it to go horizontal versus vertical? And I could add some styles in here. You know, maybe I add some, I don't know, flexbox type of styles in here to make it do that sort of thing. Or maybe there's some smart defaults, like if you wrap it in a row tag, then everything in here is going to be horizontally, you know, spaced out or something, you know, on the same line. Whereas in this example up here, maybe you expect these to be, you know, each, you know, vertically stacked. In iOS, there's I think stack views or stack layouts.
Yeah, stack views. Yeah,
and you can specify
iOS
the
and
order
Mac.
if they're vertical or horizontal.
Yeah, they're one or the other.
There's also in iOS there is
Collection view.
Auto layout.
Yeah.
With visual formatting language. So there's this gem called Motion Layout. It's pretty nice in working with that. So you can define like the vertical and the horizontal layout here using this visual formatting language. The dashes here is like a standard space, which I think in this scenario here is 8.
The dash means go to the inset layer. So there's a couple of rectangles in your view. So there's a standard inset layer. This came up because of the iPhone 10.
Mm-hmm.
So when you turn the iPhone 10 on the side, you've got the ears or the horns or whatever you want to call them.
Uh-huh.
And so the view is actually as wide as up to the extent of the horns. But you want your stuff inset from that.
Right.
So there's I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head. So when you're dealing with constraints a lot, but that's what the dash means.
It's the safe area,
right?
Yeah, the safe area. Well, the dash here means give it some margin. You know, the pipes mean to the edge.
Yeah, the pipe is the edge. Either the vertical
horizontal. Here, the problem with this syntax here is that you have to define horizontal for each row. But I've got a row for this element that says from the left edge, make sure there's a standard amount of space. Put the element in the middle and stretch it out as wide as it needs to be. Add some more margin on the right side, all the way up to the right edge. So, and it's the same thing with this one down here. And the vertical is from the top, give it some standard spacing. Put the element in here, you know, it doesn't specify the width, so iOS is going to magically determine that for us. Make sure there's a certain amount of space, you know, standard margin between these two elements, and another margin at the bottom. So this is one default way of laying out this view with this layout. But I think that that's a challenge here in figuring out how to lay out these components in a way that's intuitive. Because Flow suffers from this problem too. It uses this custom Flexbox layout implementation. So you lay things out using a Flexbox style.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, Andrew, I'm sorry. I gotta go.
Okay.
I have to load a trailer. So you guys, this is really interesting though. It'd be interesting to see where it goes.
Yeah. Well, the one thing I was going to say was that I'm interested in recruiting volunteers to help me make this a reality.
It's a lot of work.
Yeah.
That's sure.
You need a minion.
Yeah, you want to loan me some?
Talk to Amir. He has 3. Anyway, I gotta go. So
Okay.
see ya.
Have a good vacation, Laurie.
Thanks. I'm only gone until Tuesday. I'll be back Tuesday. Okay. Bye-bye.
See ya.
Layouts. So that's one thing that needs to be solved. Components need to render or know how to render native views. So one thing that would be cool is, let's say you've got your component, but then you want some sort of UI, I don't know, segmented control, without having to do anything special. You can access these components. I don't know if this would be possible or if you need to write some sort of a wrapper around it, but it would be I think it's really important that this framework support being able to render native components. Like, we shouldn't have to do a lot of work in order to make use of UI views that already exist. That's one thing that needs to be figured out there. And it might be nice if we keep the template, the compiled template format the same. So like in this example here, it's like an array of objects. In this one here, it's like hard-coded UI views. Maybe keeping the array syntax is better so that they're the same in both cases. So what do you guys think about these concepts so far, or what are your thoughts on this stuff?
Dan's on mute.
Yeah. So I don't have much or any experience with the JavaScript frameworks that this seems to be inspired by.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm having trouble conceptualizing why you'd want to use them. But I think that's a personal problem.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess it's partially it's to avoid writing code like this, where you're building out individual elements. Partially because by doing this, it is a little verbose and unintuitive, or it's not as declarative, I think is the word I'm looking for. Like you can read through and hear, okay, and see, I'm making a button, I'm making a label, but you don't get a good picture of what it looks like. When I look at this XML here, I can see pretty clearly, oh, there's a button on top, and there's some text with something in here, and accounts displayed there. And, you know, glancing at this code, it is a little harder to read through it quickly to get a picture of what it looks like.
Yeah.
The other issue is that it's, you know, this is iOS specific. You need to do something different on Android, which I know Amir is a big proponent of. Just do one platform. Don't worry about cross-platform stuff until you really need to. But I think there's plenty of use cases where, or companies or projects or startups that need to target multiple platforms like right away. I worked on a startup. I worked on a social network startup, and we a social network where only half of your friends can use it is not a very good social network, you know, because half the people are on Android, and we didn't have an Android app yet. We just had an iOS app.
There are a lot of situations where you have to develop both from the outset.
Yeah.
Yeah. And no matter what you feel about what the one-size-fits-all kind of approach looks like, that's a given. That's just a business requirement. So saying that you don't like what happens or what comes out of that or anything like that, well, that's all very nice. But the fact is that people go, this is what I need. What can you do for me?
Yeah, so that's part of the motivation behind abstracting this a little bit, so that it's you're working with some more generic components. The other benefit is having standalone components. So right in this example, it's like it's pretty simple that this is, you know, like one big view that has a button and some text on it, and that's not a very good. It's not a good real world example, but if you've got like I don't know, another example, something a lot more complicated would be like you've got a chart with some data and, you know, dashboard. You know, having components that know how to render themselves given some set of data helps to simplify this a lot. Now you could, you know, if you're doing this in native code, you would still build out your custom views or view controllers and wire this stuff up manually, which is totally fine. I mean, that's how people have been doing it since, you know, since iOS came along. But having smart components that know how to update themselves when the outside world has changed, I think is a useful feature that having a templating or a reactive component framework makes it a lot easier to implement that sort of thing. And I've worked on plenty of iOS apps that have started out simple, like with rendering a few views, and then kind of grown, and then you got this giant view controller that does all sorts of different things, and figuring out like when a certain view gets updated or rendered in a certain state at a certain time. can be a little challenging sometimes. And having, React was, I guess, maybe the first proponent of having components that don't know how to like update properties, or like they're restricted from updating properties. All they can do is render or use the properties that they've been given. This is the data down, actions up philosophy. So you take the properties that you're given and then you render those, but you don't add other actions or side effects within the component, because then it just ends up getting messy. What you do is you pass up the action outside of it. So on your component, you have like an on-change event, and then outside of that component, you do something different, and then you pass the new data back down to the component. It's able to it's just a dumb component that just renders whatever it's given. That sort of logic flow makes it so that it's really easy to reason about how this component works and when the template gets updated and how it gets that way. I've also worked on some projects where we've had a designer, like a dedicated designer, who is involved in helping to style the app. But when all that stuff is in code like this, that makes it hard for a designer to like, unless they're familiar with Ruby or Objective-C, or if your views are all in Interface Builder and then having them learn how to use Interface Builder, it's all really challenging. But if you've got these standalone components with a simple templating framework, templating language, and some styles, or separated out, then they can kind of work on their own building out the components and styling them how they need to. And then when they're done building them out, styling them how they want to, then you can just make use of them, wire up the functionality. So I've worked on some projects that have had a style guide, even an interactive style guide. So we'll build out components, and you can see like a huge component library of all the different components in your app, and you can see all the various states that they are in and what they look like, and the designers can build those out and style them how they want to, and make sure that they're the way they want them to look before you even have to wire them up. So that's another benefit.
Yeah, that's cool. It also reminds me a little bit, I mean, having said that I wasn't very familiar with it, TVML is very similar in some ways, although it's, the mechanism by which it gets rendered is different.
Yeah.
There's actually a way to, just speaking on like how this would be implemented, there is a way to generate TVML in an app and then render it directly in the app, which might be something that we want to leverage. I don't know.
You could also generate zip files too, if you were feeling adventurous.
Yeah, I don't know about that. I don't know if that's a path that I want to go down.
I was just throwing it out there.
Yeah.
Actually, the zip files aren't all that bad. I mean, they have all the internal characteristics, which have, the internal variable like attribute names and things like that, right? But if you can read XML, you can look at a zip file and go, oh yeah, okay, that's a UI button, right? Oh, and that's the border, and that's the color, and that's the background, and that's the that sort of thing, right? It's just that the tags and stuff like that, the attributes on it are horribly named, just like they sometimes are on the class.
Well, I wonder if that's an option.
But well, just to throw that out there for you, because
well, the problem is that it's more than just a rendering it into a string of XML, because there's dynamic components to it.
Yeah.
Like arbitrary, rendering this property or attribute that gets updated at runtime. I don't know. Maybe it's possible, or maybe it's no big deal.
I'm not sure with the zip file, to tell you the truth.
Because the other thing is not sure if I mentioned it exactly, but the other thing is, or a really common thing would be to have a list of things. You iterate over a group of an array of data, and you need to output something.
Mm-hmm.
You've got a template for each individual thing in that list. The converting that iterator into something that can be used at runtime is the challenging part, because it's not just rendering a string.
Well, that is actually how collection views and table views work. So the cell is actually, if you're following the standard way of doing things, you're building in an Objective-C or a Swift, and you have a custom table cell or a custom collection view cell, you'll define that using Interface Builder. And you bring in the template of that cell for each cell that you build. And you'll sometimes store that, in a nib by itself.
I'm trying to think of an example. Let's say there's a fruits this property, this fruits property, has some objects in it. Trying to figure out how to, I guess what I was thinking when I was referring to iterators, that you'd have something in the templating language that allows you to do this sort of thing.
Yeah, there's quite a few things that you need. Another way of looking at it is that you you could use like how Rails partials work, right? Particularly with an iterated list.
Well, somewhere you need to define what the template should look like for
Yeah.
the individual
Which
thing.
you know might be a separate template file, or you know. That's kind of the concept behind the partial, right? If you want to like, and that has its own complexities too.
Well, things to ponder.
Yes.
Well, is this a framework or a concept that you guys could get behind? Something that you think is well suited or well designed for the RubyMotion community?
I could see that people would find it attractive. I don't know that I'm personally the best to direct that question to. You might want to run it past Amir and see if Amir finds like has some ideas about how he could integrate it with other things, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, because this might fit in with some of his ideas that he has about, you know, building, you know, the simple app sort of idea. And
yeah,
you know, what I think he's looking for is you start out with some very simple code, and then you expand on it and expand on it, and you increase the complexity as you go until you get the app that you need by, you know, doing that complexity.
Yeah.
The reason why I say it's probably not for me, because I tend to focus more on other kinds of things which are outside some of your use cases that you have, Andrew, such as, you know, I'm not really targeting both platforms at once, or the platforms that I'm targeting are like Mac and iOS, as opposed to iOS and Android.
Mm-hmm.
So the cross-platform thing for me is less, and the difference between a Mac and an iOS app often means, you know, I fall into the camp where I think that the interaction paradigms are different enough that you're sharing code, but you're not trying to implement a single app. The whole marzipan thing that came up, I don't exactly know how that's going to play out.
Yeah.
Right. Like I don't necessarily feel that, you know, putting an iPhone. I mean, I run iPhone apps on my Mac all the time in the simulator, right? And it doesn't give me great joy. Right? It's not like, oh wow, look what I've been missing. So
you need a Mac simulator on your Mac, so you can run those iOS apps on your Mac simulator.
But I also don't understand. I mean, you're talking about going back and forth between Android and iOS, and you've got all these iOS developers that go, yeah, I don't know how to build a Mac app, and I go, really? What? It's tough, you know? Wow. What do you use for a UI color? An NS color? Was that a great leap? You know, so developers are what developers are. But yeah, so the ability, you know, to define these things. I like the separation, and I know what you mean about you know the paradigms in Cocoa at least do lend themselves towards really heavy controllers.
Mm-hmm.
And
there's a lot of different. I've heard a lot of different, you know, acronyms that have come out. Like, you know, there's the MVVM.
Yeah, yeah.
The ones that have the presenters in there. There's one called Viper.
Yeah. I've seen
Views,
some of those
actors,
things too,
presenters.
and you know, I'm on I like you are, like I'm on some core Cocoa kinds of lists where the non RubyMotion people, the you know, Swift and Objective-C people are talking about these things, and it's not necessarily, you know, oh, everyone's saying that they're going to switch, right? I mean, so what you get in some of these cases are people pull them up and they switch. Now, you know, there are paradigms that develop in any language that people that are writing the language just go, well, that's the way we do it, right? And then when you're used to writing something different, you look at it and you go, how can you stand that? I don't know how Java programmers get by with all those accessor methods, right? They drive me nuts now, right? You know, I can code Java, I just don't want to.
Right.
You know, I think it's the same thing in the .NET world too, right? You know, it's like, why are you writing these things? Don't you have some way of like saying, you know, I need a reader accessor for this attribute? Yeah, you write the method. Oh, no, stop, you're hurting me. So like I really like the separation. I mean, something that I'm working on right now, I'm actually looking for a way of trying to separate out that standard. I'm building something, you know, and MotionKit was an attempt at doing that too, right? And I think it was a pretty good attempt at doing it. The problem with MotionKit is I think that some of the steam has gone out of it, right? Because it was iOS and, you know, Mac OS, it was never Android, right? So for the people that wanted to go between iOS and Android, MotionKit didn't solve their problems. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, and the people that were working on it, I think, have sort of moved on. So, you know, although I think there's a large community out there that uses MotionKit, I don't know how long it will continue that way.
Yeah.
Right?
But I think a lot of these layout or UI frameworks, I think the problem is that they're all still mostly like Ruby based. Like they come up with a nice Ruby DSL or API, and that's what you're using to build out your views. But they're not really addressing the component part of it, like the reactive component part, which
well, yeah. I mean, so there's if that was the sole sore point, then yeah, you've nailed something. I'm not sure that is the sole sore point, but that could be the sore point, you know, for many people. I'm the wrong person to ask about that. That's what I'm saying. That's right. But I like the way that it's structured. I mean, I see a lot of benefit in the way that it's structured. I can see a lot of things where it's like, yes, if you had something, you know, this would be better, right? And it might be that what you do is you really cut it down to its simplest form. Like, for instance, on the screen now, we're looking at template.xml, right? You may remove all the conditional logic, right? So you may say in the first cut that there's no conditionals, and then you add in conditionals if it's needed, right? So
because this could be this part here could be within this component here.
Yeah.
Yeah, the simple way would be don't support any kind of directives or functions.
Yeah. And just, you know, you have the name part, and you know, if the name is blank, then you pass in a blank, right? And don't worry about it. You know, and what you're looking for is you want people to come in and start using it. Now, the unfortunate thing is once they start using it, they'll have their own ideas about what it should look like and what should be added next, right? Which is not necessarily bad. It means A, they're using it, and B, they want it to do more, you know, they want to use it in more places than they're currently using it when they do that. And that may drive where you go next with the things that are important with the framework. That's the thing about the framework, right? There's a lot of work to get the framework up and running. You know, as you said, you know, there's a whole long list of things that this has to work, and this has to work, and this has to work, and this has to work. And it might be that, you know, you need to build something up that where you start tackling some of these things and see how it works, and then start tackling some of the other things, right? The live reload, which is a big selling point, you know, was a big selling point for, you know, that Swift library. Now, people had some issues, right? They said live reload is fine when you're doing development, but, you know, some people said, yeah, it doesn't bother me that much, right? Some of it is what is the thing that's bothering you, right? And so people are going to go, yeah, this is something that I really need, right? This is the thing that I need. And other people are going to go, yeah, it's not really, you know. And I know that from personal approach, right? You know, I use RubyMine all the time because nothing else indents my code properly. And people go, oh, well, this indenting is pretty good. And I look at it and I go, yeah, no, I can't use that. No, RubyMine does exactly what I want it to do in an indenter, right? And all the, you know, and I've looked at these ones, right? Because, you know, it's heavy compared to Sublime or, you know, TextMate or Atom or, you know, any of the other ones, right? Atom might be getting up there because it's all running in Chrome and stuff like that. But you know, I run it and I go, okay, my code is indented properly, right? I don't have to play around with pushing the indents over because, you know, it didn't understand that, you know, no, this is another parameter in those parentheses indented at the same level, right? I want my parameters to line up. Is it that hard? Why do you not understand this? You know, and other people, it's like, yeah, I'm not paying $200 for RubyMine. What are you, crazy? I can get Sublime for free, right? There you go.
Yeah.
So I mean, there's different things that different people are going to have, right? And so, but I think that there's a lot of value in what you're proposing. The thing is going to be to get community momentum behind you, and, you know, making sure that you're aligned with Amir is important for that. And then finding, you know, some other developers that say, yeah, this solves my problems, and they're going to come in and they're going to work on the things that are important to them, whether it's the live reload or it's, you know, directives in the templating language or whatnot, right? You know, that sort of idea. I think limiting your stuff down to, you know, what is the bare minimum I need to roll something out so that people can try this and say, hey, this is pretty cool, I like it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is definitely not necessarily version 1. This is
oh yeah
all the components kind of split out into their different responsibilities.
Yeah, what I might suggest is that maybe you take it a little bit further, you know, with some things, and then maybe flesh out in terms of a roadmap, at least a preliminary roadmap that people that are willing to get involved and contribute can then have a vote in changing what the roadmap looks like. Now, the problem that I personally have with any of these frameworks is that sometimes the things that you need to do to build the app the way that you want, the framework hides that from you, and the question is always, can you get down to it?
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely something I want to be able to support really easily because, as I mentioned, I've been doing some React Native stuff, and working with React Native is fine until you have to do something native.
Bingo.
Trying to build a native component for something so far has been really complicated and not pleasant.
One of the issues that I have with RedPotion is the fact that when I hit a problem, I don't know if it's me using RedPotion, if it's RedPotion translating to the core OS calls, or if it's not supported in, you run this whole, you've just complicated your debugging process when you're trying to figure out how to do something. Whereas when I'm using the core calls, if I'm doing it wrong, then I'm doing it wrong, right? And if I find an example, like in Swift, I can convert the Swift to Ruby and go, oh, okay, that's what I'm doing wrong. Oh, that's the way to do it. But converting the Swift into, something like RedPotion or what was the other one that I used for a bit? It was ProMotion. I was trying to do something in ProMotion and I just hit a wall, right? Because, it turns out that when you're dealing with tables and stuff like that, it's really not all that hard. So, the thing that I was trying to do wasn't hard as long as you weren't using a framework on top of the core stuff, right? So I tend to be a little bit leery about, just dumping in a whole pile of gems for anything that I'm doing. For instance, I wouldn't use motion layout.
Yeah.
So
I would not want to build this out by hand.
Actually, what you've got there, it's just about the same difficulty in visual format language as what you have in motion layout. So because I've used the visual layout language for a few things, I tend to use the raw constraints. And although they're really, really wordy, people look at the code and they go, but once you start using them and reading them, you know exactly what they're doing, right? They have some horrible things, right? Like you have to set active equal to true on it afterwards and stuff like this, right? So, I mean, you can't define a constraint that fits inside of 80 characters.
Yeah.
But the newer constraint language stuff is actually, I found that when I was using it, right, like, I told it exactly what I wanted and I could do it. I mean, the calls were long, but having code assist where it, okay, that's the one I want, right? Where it completes it for you. That's one of the helper things, right? They should turn off the code assist in Xcode at Apple, and they'd come up with method names that actually make sense to people in the real world.
Yeah.
Because if they had to type all that out, they'd go, yeah, this is too long. But yeah, and so a lot of people use motion layout, right? But and I get it, right? But to me, I look at it and I don't know how well motion layout is maintained or if it's going to be maintained going forward. Who's going to invest the time, right? And so you run the risk if you're writing code that the one thing you don't want to do, which Ruby people are moving away from, although the JavaScript people tend to do it, is that JavaScript stuff they tend to build on top of other things, right? So you hear about these stories about, yeah, I included one thing in my Node stuff, and I had spent 20 minutes downloading 4,000 different frameworks or something like that, right? Whereas, you know, a lot more you'll see the Rails people are going, yeah, don't include the framework. There's some core frameworks that you use, and other ones that, yeah, it's like, you know, just roll your own.
Well, I think my perception of the Rails philosophy is that there is a, you know, convention over configuration. They give you a good set of defaults to work with. But if you want to do something custom, you can. Try to stay out of your way when you want to do that. But that it just works how you would expect it to work right out of the box.
When it comes to Rails, there's a don't overload the core framework too much. So I note that they've actually taken more things out of core Rails as they've gone on, as opposed to actually put more and more functionality in. You know, so there was a bunch of things that used to be considered, you know, oh, you had to have this, you had to have this, yeah, and they made it like, no, you know, if you want this, then there's an engine that you download or something like that, right? So that they weren't, you know, forcing you to include all of these things that you didn't necessarily want or need. You know, and there are some gems in Rails that, you know, if you're building a Rails app, you download, like Devise. People go, yeah, well, just get Devise. If you're doing authentication, get Devise, right? But, you know, I've seen a lot of the real hardcore Rails people that are writing a lot of Rails applications where, you know, people will ask about, you know, admin. I need to add admin functions. Which gem should I use? And they go, well, why don't you just try doing it custom until you find out whether or not you need? Because, you know, if you get the you know, there's about 4 or 5 like Rails admin and things like that, right? What you may find is you get them, but as soon as you need to customize something, it's more hassle than it's worth, right? You know, it works if you're doing exactly what it does, but as soon as you step outside of the box, right, that's it, right? You're hooped. I actually had that problem with Devise, right? I was trying to do something and Devise was it just got in the way as opposed to saving time. And that's the risk you run with any framework that you include, right?
Yeah.
So, but like I said, I think that there's a lot of promise in here that I would suggest, you know, run this past Amir and see what Amir would suggest, right? Because, you know, having Amir on board, like saying, you know, here's where I see things heading, because Amir's going to point RubyMotion in directions that he wants to point it in, right? That's, you know, so if you're riding along with that and you're helping him, you know, he's going to push it forward. Right? He's going to help it. He may not work on it, but like if it aligns with the things that he's doing, and I could see where something like this would make that easier. You know, having that base framework that people could use for doing these sorts of things would be really helpful. You know, I feel the same way about this as I do about RedPotion. Just because I don't like using RedPotion doesn't mean RedPotion isn't a good gem or that people shouldn't use it, right? Those are 2 completely different things, right? Do I want to use RedPotion? I'd rather do it other ways, right? If you want to use RedPotion, then you should use it, right? It is a good gem. A lot of people have found it really useful. You should use it if you think it's a good idea. So, you know, and I haven't let Dan get a word in edgewise. Dan, do you want to add anything?
No, just that you're right. You know, it's some measure of traction needs to be had to flesh out all the ideas that are presented here, because it seems like it's going to be a lot of work.
Yeah, I definitely don't want to build something where I'm going to be the only one interested in using it, because I don't want to be the only one maintaining it. But also because I want it to be useful and intuitive for other people to use.
Yeah. Well, and there is some good ideas in here, Andrew. I really think that there is. Yeah, you know.
And I also haven't spent very much time like sketching this out, so I think that there's definitely improvements that can be made to this whole concept or DSL or
I think that might be the first step, is to sort of harden the DSL and then maybe put together something where you're using it, like a sample little toy app where you've got something stood up.
Mm-hmm.
And just do iOS as an example.
Yeah.
And for something like this, I would suggest that you concentrate on iOS and Android. Because as much as, I love doing things, and I would do iOS first, admittedly, right? If you don't get uptake, all the stuff to convert it to Android, right, is that's sort of the idea, right? Almost look at it as in that startup approach, right? We're going to put an MVP out there. We're going to see what people think of it. And if you get a bunch of people on board that go, this is great, right? I mean, is there an Android? Does it work with Android? You go, not yet, but how much time are you willing to contribute?
Yeah. Well, if all this if this only supported iOS, it would still be useful, because I think, at least for me, one of my biggest pet peeves, or one of the areas that I think wastes development time, is tweaking UI stuff and having to rebuild it. And it would be really nice if I could just tweak a few styles, adjust. Oh, that's too many pixels tall. I got to shrink it down a little bit. To be able to do that quickly using a live reload sort of thing would be really useful.
Like I said, that was one of the selling points of that Swift framework that I think that we both saw.
Mm-hmm.
It had an XML language, and having an XML definition language is okay for something that's declarative, as long as it's simple.
Mm-hmm.
I'm actually considered something of an XML expert, because I work on XML standards that the W3C uses to test, if the reference implementations are up to snuff. So they're horrible and they're ugly.
Yeah.
So, but my approach is I just as soon see it in YAML as anything else, right? YAML has pros and cons too, but
yeah, I guess it'd be more like it'd be kind of like HAML in that way. YAML is that templating language for Rails that.
And that's something really funny, because I don't like using HAML, but I do like using YAML. And I'll admit it, that's a quirk.
Well, it is 9 o'clock here Pacific time.
Yeah.
So I think it's a good time to wrap up. Thanks, guys, for joining me. thanks, Lori, for joining also.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Andrew.
Sign up
Don't
for
know if I'll be on the call next month. I'll have to see where my schedule finds me.
Yeah. Well, sign up for the RubyMotion Meetup mailing list.
I think I'm there.
Keep an eye out for this reactive components gem. And guess I'll see you guys next time.
Bye-bye, guys.
All right, take it easy.
Bye.